Thursday was to be opening day at the K, but as you know, there is no baseball, no sports during the COVID-19 pandemic. But that doesn't mean we can't talk baseball, so Royals beat writer Lynn Worthy, star columnist Vahe Gregorian, and me, Blair Kirchhoff, talked Royals, lineups, new owner John Sherman, new manager Mike Matheny, and toward the end, we chatted about our favorite baseball movies. It started as a Facebook Live and is now presented as a SportsBeat KC podcast. Hey, and here's a heads up before we get started. The first 2.5 minutes or so, we were working out some bugs in the system, and you'll hear an echoey sound from me. Please don't bail on us. We were able to get it cleaned up quickly. So, here we go. As we do, we're going to jump in and talk about what's another in a series of kind of sad days of missing major sporting events. And of course, this is always a big day in Kansas City. It starts on the home opener, whether it's the first game of the season or the home opener. It starts with Greater Kansas City Day, with selling of newspapers and Royals flags on the streets of Kansas City. A charitable enterprise raises money for youth and youth camps, and then that leads into the first pitch. And it would have happened today at 3 o'clock at Kauffman Stadium against the Seattle Mariners, and I think they would have gotten this one in. Looks nice, and the temperatures in the mid-60s. We've had a little bit of rain. I don't know about where you guys live. Out south, where I am, we had a little bit of rain early this morning, but I think this would have been a perfect day for an ideal day, really, for an opening day at the K. Lynn and Vahe, you guys have been to opening days before. I actually have only been to a couple in my time at the Kansas City Star, simply because this time of year I am at the Final Four, and Vahe, you've spent so many years at the Final Four as well. And I believe this year the idea was trying maybe to be here today and then get on a plane and go to Atlanta for the Final Four.
I had a couple things set up, Blair. One was I was going to see Ned Yost yesterday. I had a plane flight set up to go see his farm near Atlanta. One scenario coming back today, getting back in time for the game. Then another scenario to leave tomorrow to go see the Final Four. There are a lot of things in play. I think this is just like a lot of people. So instead, here we are, just home, as you said, and there's a little ache. I think there's a little extra ache on the day these events really happen. And I think it's probably something really pronounced in Lynn, just because this is the day that would start sort of this whole new phase of his season, which really already began about 2 months ago.
Yeah. I mean, in reality, this would have been the first time back in Kansas City for almost 2 months, because the way spring training set up, they would have gone to Milwaukee for a couple exhibition games, started the season in Chicago, and then went from Chicago to Detroit. And so I would have just got back from Detroit last night at some point for the first time in a couple of months away from Kansas City, having gone through Arizona and spring training and everything. So, yeah, I would have been back and driving to the K this morning, or, probably depending on what time Clubhouse opened, and getting ready to see some baseball fans in Kansas City for the first time in months.
And what I don't know, how many games would they have played? 4 or 5 by now?
I want to say, was it 6?
Oh, was it 6?
They would have played, I think, 3 in Chicago and then 3 in Detroit, but it was spread out. So that's why I want to say it was 6, because they would have opened last week. Maybe it was only 5, actually. Now that I think
5.
Maybe it was only 5. Yeah,
maybe
it might only been 5, because they spread it out so much. I think it was probably just 5.
So 5-0, probably 4-1 at the worst, coming home for the home opener. I think we all would have counted on a great start for the Royals, and actually they've gotten off to some pretty poor starts in the last few years. So anyway. It's not happening, and what are we missing by not having opening day at the K? Well, one of the things that I always look forward to is it's the press box is full that day. Everybody, heck, the Star has, I don't know, half a dozen, 7, 8 people out there in the press box. one of the I don't know why I thought of this, but one of the things I always kind of look forward to is the team, and it does this every year. They introduce new menu items for the concession stands, right? And they actually have media come out and sample these items about a week or so in advance. And last year, I can remember it was the brisket tater tot special. That was tater tots, cheese, topped with brisket in a stadium cup. I mean, I just thought that was pretty darn cool. So that's look, it would have filled. Kauffman would have been filled today. I know they were having some issues with ticket sales before the pandemic hit, and but I'm pretty sure they would have gotten close to 39,000 out there at the K, and we were really looking forward to this season. Look, the prognostication for the Royals, not good, coming off consecutive 100-loss seasons, but there were some reasons to feel that this team was going to be and still will be a little bit better than the most previous editions. The health is much better going into this season, and the lineup looks like, at least from from 1 through 9 batting order, look a little bit better than certainly what we ended last season with. So, Lynn, take us through what might we have expected from a Royals lineup today?
Well, Danny Duffy probably would have lined up to be your home opening starter. Brad Keller most likely would have started opening day on the road, but Danny Duffy would have probably started the home opener, which would have just added to the atmosphere, because Duffy, obviously a longtime Royal, guy who came up through the system, a guy who just has an intensity about him on the mound. But I think lineup-wise, and I went back to the last game that they didn't play in spring training, which was against the Mariners. And Mondesi was actually in the lineup that day. Again, since the game never got played, we never saw Mondesi play all spring training, but he was in the lineup that day. So just making some adjustments on that lineup that they put out that day, because that day they had Gallagher catching, and I would bet that Salvi would have been behind the plate. Salvi was in this lineup that day, except he was at DH. But I'm guessing we would have had Merrifield either at second or center. I'm going to guess center. Mondesi, Dozier, Soler probably playing right. Soler probably DH and Dozier in right. That day he was in the outfield actually. But then they had Salvi batting was that fifth. This lineup had Gordo sixth, but I'm thinking at first base they probably would have, depending on the pitcher, you might have had O'Hearn in there, so maybe Gordo even bumps down a spot. Franco starting at third base, he's batting seventh, and then depending on if you say Witt's going to be in center field, then you got probably Nicky Lopez at second, probably batting ninth. So that's, compared to last year where you had, especially coming off of spring training where, O'Hearn and, for that matter, McBroom had really, just hot spring training as far as swinging the bat. There was times last year where that bottom third of the lineup was kind of shaky. That's probably being nice saying shaky. It looks like now this year, just based off of track record, based off of spring training. You talk about Franco being in there, you talk about Nicky, you talk about either O'Hearn or McBroom. The lineup definitely lengthened, and then you talk Salvi being back in the catcher. So you probably got a much more formidable lineup than what you would have saw a lot of times last season.
And as you said, look, Duffy, is kind of shaping up to be the starter today for the home opener, assuming Brad Keller would have started the season opener. You can do things with you can be make adjustments with your rotation early in the season with all the open days, and every team does that. But yeah, I think they would have fixed it so that Duffy would have started at home today. Look, when we talk about these Royals, it's like I think we're all kind of in agreement that the lineup's okay. They can win some games with that lineup. It's when you get to the mound that you start wondering where what needs to happen. And they wouldn't have needed a fifth starter for a few weeks, but if it came down to it, and when they would need it, Lynn, who do you think would have been the fifth starter?
That was still a question because I'm not sure if they would have gone with like an opener type thing. The last time we talked to Mike Matheny about it, it was still, part of the discussion is, having that opener set up where you have somebody and then you go basically bullpen. And then, because I think they tried to move away from Jorge Lopez and Glenn Sparkman as fifth starters. They wanted those guys to be bullpen guys, and they both looked like they were going to be really good in those roles. So then it becomes a matter of, who you're going to put in that fifth starter spot. I don't think they would have gone with one of the guys from the minors. I mean, I know that's what everybody wants to say and wants to think, but I don't think that, you would have saw Singer or Kowar or Lynch or Bubic until later in the season. So I'm not entirely sure which way they would have gone with that, but I think the opener was at least still a possibility.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that, scenario if the season does start. It's obviously going to start later, but how much later and how that might affect the roster. But before we do, this would have been the debut of Franco, as you said, the probably the biggest offseason acquisition. Trevor Rosenthal, of course, in the bullpen, and Greg Holland coming back. Rosenthal already on the 40-man roster. That's not the case with Holland just yet. The roster freeze. But also, this would have been the Kansas City debut of manager Mike Matheny and owner John Sherman. That, I don't know. I can imagine both of those gentlemen were so looking forward to today. And Vahe, you had a chance to talk extensively with John Sherman and wrote about it in today's Kansas City Star, and it's online on kansascity.com. I really enjoyed that piece. What kind of sense did you get from John about how much he was looking forward to being out there today?
Well, absolutely, Blair, he was. And Lynn, I didn't see John in person down at spring training. Sam Mellinger was down there with Lynn when John was there. He was there for about a week and then gone for a few days when I was there, and then he came back. But he really conveyed a lot of the excitement he felt, just starting with seeing Mike Matheny kind of in action with his team and his new team, connecting with them, and really made a point of talking about what it felt like looking around the room at how people were locked into what Mike was saying. And I think he enjoyed seeing that sort of unfold over time, too. And he also reiterated something Dayton Moore had told us in a conference call earlier, that feeling of looking out over the stadium with vendors and fans coming in at Surprise Stadium on the day baseball was shutting down, even as they were on a conference call with MLB. And I think that's right now his sort of prevailing image from there. But the reason I allude to that is also he's in this sort of funny time in the sense of, okay, new ownership, new initiative, here we go, shut down, but also not a guy to waste time. And he's been so civically involved in Kansas City for so long. I've actually thought, and I haven't had a chance to really talk sort of deep with him about this, but a little bit, that the Royals are just another one of those civic endeavors. Obviously, it's different. It's his business now. But I think it is a sort of synergy to that has him really invested in what he can do for the community now. And the Royals have mentioned a number of different initiatives, and I think there's probably other sorts of things to come, and there's still other things to be figured out. But I like his state of mind, and I like his message to Kansas City that he cares about what he called the psyche of the city through sports.
Well, and speaking of those measures, how about just this week the Royals announced 500,000 meals to harvesters? What a fantastic gesture by the Royals. All the teams in Kansas City are doing it. It's just the Royals are sort of in the spotlight this week because of the opening week of the baseball season. But yeah, that was part of the story too, wasn't it, Vahe?
Yeah, it was, and I look, we're just getting to know John a little bit, but I really like what I've seen so far in terms of his impression of this role. It's a little different than Mr. Glass, who lived in Arkansas, and that sort of sets it up differently. I think we're going to see what pure local ownership really means in the months and years ahead. And I think the impact of that will be its own thing. And I'm not trying to diminish Mr. Glass. I mean, certainly you could have critical points made about him, but obviously a lot of wonderful points to be made about him. But it is just different having this. And what's interesting, and Blair, I think we've talked about it, maybe Lynn, you and I have too, with Clark Hunt living in Texas, again, it's not like he's absentee, but he doesn't live here. And with Mr. Glass having lived in Arkansas, this is the first local ownership of one of these two franchises since Ewing Kauffman. Obviously, Sporting KC has that in spectacular fashion, and that's made a big impact on the community that's there. So I think there's all kinds of interesting possibilities to that that we'll explore going forward. But I think it's good for the city at a time like this.
Hey, and Vahe, you and Sam Mellinger and I a couple of weeks ago spoke about Mike Matheny, and that's we actually taped it for a podcast that hasn't run yet, but and it will at some point. But I wanted to kind of revisit that as well, and I just remember some of the points you were conveying to me were just a little bit of a. I don't know what the expectations were for you, for Sam, for you, Lynn, too. Anybody who was familiar with Mike before coming to the Royals organization last year. But look, he didn't. He started out great in St. Louis. It didn't end well for him there. He lost his job at midseason. And then he heard the stories about why it happened, why it unfolded for him the way that it did there. But talk about making a good first impression. I gotta, to me, with position battles sort of on not existent in spring training, I was my focus was tuned to Mike Matheny and what players were saying about him and what was being written about him. And I'll tell you what, I hadn't played a game yet, but I've really been encouraged in what I've heard about Mike Matheny.
Well, I'll jump in real quick and then defer to Lynn, but I felt very much that way, Blair. I was really impressed with his energy. I was impressed with the just little things like his sort of perpetual motion being out there among players. One of the things we heard as a point of criticism of him was perhaps questions about his ability to relate to or nurture younger players. If anything, my observations were the opposite. Maybe it's because it's something he worked on, or maybe, there's still a lot to be understood about how that unfolded in St. Louis. But he spent a lot of the offseason not only calling some of these guys, but going to visit a lot of them. So I thought that was pretty impressive. And just in the sort of conduit, in the minor point and yet bigger point of the media conduit, I think I found him to be terrific and full of insight, very responsive, very respectful, listening to questions and really considering them. I had quite an interesting conversation with him on the phone the other day that I'll be writing in the next couple of days that I'm looking forward to writing because I just thought he was so interesting.
Yeah, I'd say, just from when you get a new guy coming in and you want to try and figure out what you're supposed to expect. So, whether it was in the off season before he was hired or just even leading up to spring training, the time that we either spent around him or got to talk to other people. I mean, I remember Matt Holliday, who was with him in St. Louis. I talked to him at one point in the offseason, and he just raved about the type of person that he was, the type of mentor that he was. And then when you hear guys like Trevor Rosenthal, who had a previous relationship with Matheny from the time in St. Louis, and same thing with with a guy like Greg Holland, who knew him before too. They both talked. That's the sort of the common theme that I got from different people. Talked to the front office guys that ended up letting him go in St. Louis back in the GM meetings, and it was a lot of the same sort of things. So I mean, I think it's still sort of weird because everybody looks at St. Louis and obviously they fired him, but at the same time the results were multiple trips to the playoffs, a World Series trip, and never even finished below 500 in the time there. And so these questions that we had about how he's going to handle like the young guys, from everything we saw, that there was and it's just spring training, but there was no problem with that at all. And how much of that is him, how much of that is the organization? Because I wrote a story a couple of weeks ago where Nick Heath was talking about just how the veterans embraced a lot of these young guys, and talking to Matheny for that story. Matheny I genuinely felt sounded like he felt really happy about that. I mean, I didn't think he was just faking it. Like, we talked about how different it was from his day, and I think he genuinely felt happy about the way the Royals were doing things and how they were embracing these young guys, especially since, you look at this club and there's a lot of young players who they feel like might not start the season there, but they're going to be there at some point, and they're going to be there going forward. When you think about the pitchers, or if it's a young guy like Khalil Lee, or, just there's young guys that are coming that they're counting on. And they felt like they were a part of this. And that was a big thing that the front office and Matheny and player development had talked about wanting to do. So it was interesting to see how it started off. It would have been more, it will be more interesting to see how it develops as a season unfolds. The first season, of him being around. But as far as the media daily interaction with him, we found him to be, pleasant, which, from what we heard, wasn't what we were expecting. We insightful, pleasant, expansive when it came to telling different stories, different things like that. There wasn't anything that, you asked where you felt like it was going to get to be a combative situation, at least not that I can recall. So, everything seemed to be on the up and up.
Can I interject something real quick here? When Lynn started saying that about Pleasant, I thought the transition point was going to be, as opposed to Ned, instead of to what we might have expected of Mike. But I do want to say this about Ned, because it was quite an interesting dynamic with Ned and the media. Ned could be pretty gruff and cranky, certainly just challenged even the blandest of statements. But it became kind of part of this sort of fascinating back and forth. And if you understood Ned's sense of humor, I think you could appreciate it. But it is nice not having to fight through that thicket just to get a question out.
Yeah. Ned was he was a very unique dynamic with dealing with him on a daily basis. But I wouldn't. I can see why you would say that about the whole Pleasant thing. But no, actually, I liked the sort of the daily thing going on with Ned, and just at least from the beat writers, because we had sort of separate time with him too. So it was a little bit different with writers than necessarily people who were there just once every now and then, or TV people. So it was a different dynamic. So the back and forth could be heated at times, but also it wasn't personal. And then and you got used to that. I mean, like I think both of you guys probably warned me about that before last season being my first season. So I sort of knew a little bit of it, but you don't really get the full grasp until you actually do it every day. But it was funny. I think it was in Boston last year, where I was asking Ned something where I knew he was going to get his back up about it. But so he starts, hollering and grumbling as he's giving the answer. And both the other reporters, one was filling in, and the other one was one of our, local reporters, were both sort of like wide-eyed. And we walked out of it, and they looked at me, and I said, "Hey, he answered the question." I said, "It was a good answer." I said, I haven't learned at least to just not pay attention to the tone, just worry about the actual content.
The joke I always made about Ned was just have to accept the first blow and then move forward. And usually the answer is pretty good. Just take the first shot, and then, hey, that's a good answer.
Yeah. But yeah, like there was more than one time where the tone was, you're a dummy. Why are you asking me this dumb question? But the actual content of the answer is all that I worried about. So.
Hey, happy retirement to Ned, and I think at some point there'll be some big tribute for him at Kauffman Stadium. I don't know in what form it'll take, but all he did was get the Royals to 2 World Series and a World Championship, and that was an amazing time. Also, Ned, with I think the greatest postseason winning percentage of any manager for 20 games or something like that. So anyway, good for Ned. Good for Kevin Horton, who tells us there's only one Major League Baseball team in Missouri, and it's the St. Louis Cardinals. Kevin, come on, don't spoil the opening day vibe here in Kansas City. All right.
I don't know what Kevin means.
Kevin is a big Cardinals fan. Big Cards fan. Hey, it's Blair. Hey, we have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners. unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns we have to offer. And it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. For your convenience, your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. A lot of subscription services won't tell you that. They'll just sneak it on there. We just told you. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star. Please visit kansascity.com/sportsbeatkc offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. All right, so hey, we have no idea when baseball is going to start. We have the latest word from Major League Baseball was hopefully in June, I think, or spring training or some kind of training in mid-May with the start of June. I don't see how that's possible for baseball now. Already there are majority of states with stay-at-home orders. The city of Toronto has a kind of a sort of a stay-at-home order until June 30th. I just think that as these weeks progress, we're going to see the start date for baseball pushed back even further. And I recall in 1995 when after the '94 strike season that stopped baseball. We didn't have a World Series that year, and then the strike continued into '95, and it started late. And baseball went back to like an abbreviated spring training before the season opened that year. Obviously they're going to have to do something like that this year. But Lynn, I know you're on this every day. What's the latest news on when and how baseball can get back up and running again?
Well, I should say about the Toronto thing, just because I'm sure somebody will be running to their computer to do the clarification, because I think Toronto did put a clarification out that said that, like, the thing that was banned through June 30th, I think, was public events.
And then the city-run events, I think, were which in baseball isn't. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And so they put a clarification out that said that wouldn't necessarily prohibit something like as a baseball game. Of course, that doesn't necessarily address whether that would have to be no fans or because that's something that's been discussed too. Major League Baseball's the commissioner spoke just last week, and he was still talking about potentially, late May, early June as something that he just said was sort of the optimistic approach. I mean, because I think once the CDC put out no gatherings of 50 people and don't be no events with more than 50 people, and don't want you to gather in groups of more than 10 through 8 weeks, that puts you right there at least into the middle of May. So the middle of May is the earliest that you could even think about doing anything really. And I think there's probably going to need to be 2 to 3 weeks, maybe. I don't know if they'd go as many as 4 weeks as far as the spring training to get guys back into, ready to play ball. So, I mean, even if you could start that in mid-May, then June would be the earliest. If you only gave them 2 weeks, probably got to give them 3. So you're talking probably a week or so into June before you could even start thinking about it. And I don't know if there's really going to be places to be able to do that in terms of cities where you could do this. I mean, and you also have to factor in that some of these cities, or a lot of these cities, are on different
orders.
Yeah, I mean, and also just the virus is spreading differently in different places. I mean, there's 2 baseball teams in New York City, and I don't know how they're going to play games at those ballparks anytime soon. So I think and then just yesterday, the lead official over at KU Med talked about, and this wasn't based off of anything necessarily scientific, just his opinion as a regional health expert, that June might be too optimistic for playing games at the K, that you might be looking at late summer.
Wow. And then there's all sorts of questions after that, is how long a season would be, how many games need to be played for it to be a season, what would the postseason look like? Are we talking about an expanded postseason structure, expanded rosters? I think we've already gotten a clue on that. They're talking about 29-man rosters for when baseball returns. Are we looking at neutral site postseason games if the season stretches into November and say the Twins and the Cubs and teams in the Rockies and very cold weather climates are successful and are in the postseason. There's just so many unknowns. How many games need to be played for it to be a championship season? Is it 100? Is it 81? What are we looking at? What's logical?
Just from my standpoint, real quick, I like the idea of 81, Blair. I feel like
half a season.
Yeah, but I feel like the really interesting question does start to become, let's say it's late July. What do you do with that? I mean, are there going to be multiple doubleheaders? How do you engineer it in such a way that the baseline regular season is valid to even create a postseason? And I think that's probably a different number for everybody. I mean, part of the whole point of the 162 game schedule is the slog, right? Knowing that that's how you get through it. So obviously it's going to be tweaked quite a lot, if not completely overhauled. The question I would ask is, if it gets to be August, what do you do then? Do you just create some kind of round robin model tournament? I mean, what?
Right.
It sounds silly almost to talk about that now. There's still a lot of time between now and then, and yet probably if they're not talking about what model it would be when you get down to that kind of time frame, then they're being negligent.
Well, I think they're probably having those discussions. Just we're not privy to as far as the different, But it is interesting, to think about. Like you say, the slog of the season. I think it becomes a different slog, though. Still not the same grind. But I mean, when you start talking about double headers on a regular basis, and I mean, are you, there's teams that got guys. I mean, like for the Royals, is Alex Gordon trotting out there for 2 games of a doubleheader every week? I don't think so. So then you have to start using your roster differently and planning on, also you're pitching differently. If you got doubleheaders that are built into the schedule, so that means, that's 2 starters that are going to be on the same day every time through the rotation. So that's extra pitching that you have to use there, whether that means openers, whether that means young guys that you got to dip into to be able to fill out, a rotation on a regular basis.
Expanded
for those
rosters.
Games. Yeah, exactly. And just even like, so I mean, like we're talking a couple minutes ago about who's the 5th starter for the Royals. Well, when you get into double headers, so who are those extra guys who are going to be pitching there, and how's that working for you? So I mean, it's a very different slog. It's it would be interesting to see how that plays out, because it's not the traditional grind of the season, but it becomes very different in terms of the taxing that it puts on a roster and how you have to use guys and how you have to adjust for that. I also wonder, and it's not necessarily a big thing for baseball fans who just worry about the game on the field, but when they start talking about potentially pushing things back, so what does that mean logistically for some of the off-season stuff, like the, whether it's the winter meetings? Because if you're, usually season ends by the end of October, you've got GM meetings and owners meetings in November, and you don't get to the winter meetings until December, almost, a month and a half, almost 2 months removed from actual baseball games. And so now, thinking about the season that comes after that, where does all that stuff fall? It's just, in my mind, logistically, is, just the baseball calendar gets sort of just really, thrown out of whack.
Yeah, and this is just the competitive 2020 season. We're not, how it would impact 2021 and the draft this year. I think is, what are we talking about, a 5-round draft for this year that's already been pushed back to July, and perhaps a 20-round draft in 2021. We'll get into that on another show as we get closer to that. But look, that's going to have a big impact on baseball and the Royals. The one thing I did see, just from an analytics standpoint, that the fewer games that are played, the greater the chances for a team that's not expected to do well has to make the playoffs. You just do the math. I think there's for a team like the Royals coming off the consecutive 100-loss seasons. Well, if they play 100 games, they're not going to lose 100. The Royals have had seasons in the past where they haven't played well, but they've had a couple of good months, really good months. And who knows what could happen in a 81 or 100 game season if you just, you have a couple of, you get a couple of good string together a couple of good months, you can put together a good season. Well, I don't know. Go ahead.
To your point, Blair, something really, I've been thinking about this, and there's no one answer, but what is the optimal place for athletes, for baseball players specifically, to be keeping themselves right now for the best possible chance to really spring into action when this happens? Because as you noted, you could have a good couple months. Sometimes they're too late. But what if you didn't go 5-17 with a bunch of losses in games that you were leading in the first month? And the compressing of it certainly could play to the Royals' favor. And it's weird. It almost feels crass talking about that right now, but they still may play the game, so why not think about it? But I think whoever's most poised to come out of the gates, obviously with fewer games, that will have more resonance and more impact on what their season does.
Yeah, and the Royals, I mean, in the last few years, the second halves have been much better than the first halves for them. And I mean, and obviously, the first half is, it's not as though you're cutting out the first half, but maybe in a certain way you almost are, where, you just got that late part of the season, but you didn't play the games in the first part of the season. So I don't know if that really translates that way. But, in that shorter burst of time, if you catch lightning in the bottle or guys get hot, then, a hot stretch doesn't have to last as long when the season is, condensed to a couple of months to really change where you're at in the standings or to put you in contention, just because, the season just is going to be really more of a sprint than the marathon that we're used to.
All right, guys, we're about 90 minutes away or so from what would have been the first pitch. It's the weather's holding up. Looks like it'd been a perfect day for baseball. So no baseball at the stadiums, no baseball on TV, except there are some replays going on. I think Major League Baseball today is rerunning the George Brett game in the 1985 ALCS against the Toronto Blue Jays when George just basically turned around the series by himself. But I wanted to ask you guys this, and we'll sort of wind it down with this topic. I think baseball has been portrayed in Hollywood better than any other sport. There certainly are more baseball movies than any other sport, aren't there? I want to know what some of your favorites are. I've got my short list, but I want to know what yours are. And anybody out there, let us know what your favorite baseball movies are. I've got my desktop over to my right. I've been checking periodically. Let us know your favorite baseball movies, and I'll tell you whether you're right or wrong on that. All right, Vahe, start with you. What do you got for a short list of great baseball movies?
Well, certainly Field of Dreams comes up right away for me, as well as The Natural. I wasn't a very good hitter in high school baseball, but I thought I could field okay, so I called my glove Wonder Boy. True story.
Did you draw a lightning bolt in it?
Can't remember that part. And so I think those two really jump out at me. Yeah, I don't need to clog it up any more than that just now, but those are the ones that come right to mind.
Wonder Boy the Glove. I like that. All right, Lynn, what do you got?
I a lot of times when you see this on Twitter, the list of the top baseball movies, I try to stay away from that just because I don't like to pick a one, just because I like so many of them, whether it's, The Sandlot or even the Moneyball, which came out, a few years back, and I think was a Oscar candidate. And but for me, it always comes back to Major League, just because it was a great movie. But also, I remember the first time I saw it, I was probably a little younger than I maybe should have been. But I think I was with my brother, who is 5 years older, and we were at a friend's house, and they were watching the movie, and I didn't know what the heck it was, so I sat down with them and watched it. And it was in the period of time when I played a lot of Little League baseball, and where during the summer, the whole summer was basically riding bikes, going to the ballpark, and then waiting for the Little League games, in terms of we go to play during the day and then wait for when your Little League game was in the evenings on whatever days of the week that you played. So I think the fact that I associate it with sort of that time period in my life is probably a part of it. But I also just think it's a really great movie. So
I'm surprised you're not wearing your Joe Boo T-shirt.
I've got a couple baseball T-shirts, this one included, but yeah, I gotta switch it up.
I've got a few. I think seems like Bull Durham is in everybody's top 4 or 5 of baseball movies. It's got a special connection to me. The field where the stadium where that game was filmed. I played games there, American Legion baseball games at the old Durham Athletic Park. So I always enjoy watching that movie for that reason. Plus, it's a terrific movie. I've got 3 kids, and when they were younger, there were movies like Angels in the Outfield, the remake with Christopher Lloyd, Rookie of the Year, Sandlot, some of the ones. I enjoyed watching those with the kids. They all liked those movies as well. And then from the black and white division, Fear Strikes Out, the Jimmy Pearsall story. You don't see that often on the movie channel or anything, but just a sort of a movie that dealt with baseball and mental health, that was filmed in the late 50s or early 60s, I thought was really kind of ahead of its time.
Blair, what about Son of Flubber? That was around that time from the black and white era.
It was Disney, a very Disney movie.
Yeah, but speaking of that era, a more modern movie about that era. But I just did a quick scan, and I'm embarrassed I didn't even think about 42 was wonderful. Oh, yeah. It was really well done, and I'm sure there were some liberties in there, but unlike many movies that are based on true stories, my recollection was really looking up a lot of the stuff from that movie and feeling like it is really as spot on as a movie like that can be, which I think was important.
And it premiered here, did it not?
It was one of the premieres was here. It was right, I think. Gosh, I was just getting here or just about to get here, and didn't Harrison Ford come into town for the? And did they do it at the Negro Leagues Museum? I can't remember, or the Gem. Maybe they did it at the Gem Theater.
I think you're right.
That was another movie that came to mind too. If you hadn't mentioned it again, I was going to make sure I brought that one up, just because of obviously just an important period in the game, change in the game, figure in the game, and just. And as far as the movie, you talked about how authentic it was. Just the fact that it also made you feel uncomfortable at times, which, for a movie to be able to do that, I think is powerful, just because of, the subject content, but also just the fact that it could have, at least for me, sitting in the chair, had sort of that reaction where you were like, ugh, but it was important that we had that.
Hey, and for Lisa Atkins, thanks for responding. For the Love of the Game, good movie. Bull Durham, Sandlot, and The Rookie. I saw The Rookie was on ESPN just this past weekend. That was fun to see. 37-year-old rookie throwing a 98-mile-an-hour fastball based on a true story. And I'll give you a sleeper pick just to go out on. Not well known, but it's basically the movie that Bull Durham was based on. It's called Long Gone. You probably haven't heard of it. It was an HBO-only movie. If you can find it, it's worth the search. Long Gone. Virginia Madsen is in it. There's some Henry Gibson. It's an eclectic cast, but I'm sure if you enjoyed movies about underdog teams, and you will enjoy the movie Long Gone. So, all right, guys. Well, that'll do it for our first Royals Facebook Live of the season. I hope there are more. I hope we get to talk about live baseball at some point this year. I wanted to thank Lynn Worthy and Vahe Gregorian for hanging out with us. Beth Welsh does a remarkable job producing these things. Neil Nakahoto was very valuable today in helping put together today's show. So until we meet again, take care. And I now have a cat on the table. So long, you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Well, that'll do it for today. Big thanks to our production team of Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Neil Nakahoto, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. Today's tip of the cap goes to Lynn Worthy and Vahe Gregorian for making time to talk baseball. Links to Royal Stories can be found in the show notes on kansascity.com and in the Kansas City Star, where you get the best coverage of regional news and sports. I told you earlier how to get a Sports Pass subscription. Well, for a digital subscription for all of the Kansas City Star coverage, go to account.kansascity.com/subscribe. That's account.kansascity.com/subscribe. We'll be back on Friday on SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City every day.